thank you all very much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your interest both in women's history and in protecting our environment. This is the last day of Women's History Month. Next month, on April 22nd, we're going to celebrate Earth Day. So what I want to do in the next 20-25 minutes is to talk about how these two ideas intersect and demonstrate how women today can see the dangers of climate change and the need for environmental protection, and how we stand on the shoulders of women activists who have come before us, who have fought in the past against prejudice, sexism, and discrimination to make this a better world. In 1896, a male speaker attacked public roles for women by commenting that a woman's brain involves emotions rather than intellect. This fact painfully disqualifies her for the sterner duties to be performed by the intellect. Almost 60 years later, a professor at Vassar College told his female students that they needed to take chemistry. Why? Because it would make them better cooks. Even today, when people are asked about pioneers of the environmental movement, they might mention Theodore Roosevelt and his interest in national parks, or John Muir and his interest in the Sierra Club. But the women today that I characterize as the gutsy mavericks and the quiet heroes of the environmental movement are too often overlooked. Today I want to focus on 8 of the hundreds of women, hundreds of American women, because I am focusing on American women, hundreds of American women whose dedication has shaped the modern conservation landscape. One of my friends, historian Sarah Evans, has coined the phrase, "the personal is the political." You may have heard that. What she meant was that all people, not just women, but all people, are most active politically in the areas that directly affect their lives. And this was especially true for the early environmental activists that I'm going to be discussing today. American women emerged as a major social force for reform in the 1890s. They were armed with new scientific tools, a growing sense of moral issues underlying the environmental and public health problems. Millions of women, just like you and me, joined civic organizations. This one happens to be the Woman's Wednesday Club in Fort Worth, which was formed in 1889, and believe it or not, it is still meeting today, 133 years later. And I am a proud member of this club, which is why I put this up there. I will tell them that you clapped. Under the banner of municipal housekeeping, women extended their roles from their domestic duties to concerns about their communities and the environment. Women saw the need for safe food and clean water to protect their families from disease, as well as to create beautiful surroundings to inspire their lives. Their contributions were really vital to civilizing and improving the horrific conditions that were created by the early Industrial Revolution. One such early social reformer was Ellen Swallow Richards. In 1873, Richards began the first systematic study of river and stream pollution for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, Richards was a Vassar graduate, and she simply asked to study at MIT, but she so impressed the college president that she was formally admitted as MIT's first female graduate student. Richards focused her concerns on the improvement of the household environment, and she advocated for clean kitchens, clean water, and clean cities. Her research demonstrated the need for sanitary sewer treatment systems and food inspection laws, the very first in the nation. but Richards was never allowed to finish her graduate degree. She was one of those quiet heroes who did not try to fight prevailing prejudice directly. She even cleaned house for some of her professors. Perhaps the fact that I am not a radical, she wrote, and that I do not scorn womanly duties, but claim it as a privilege to clean up and sew things, perhaps that is winning me stronger allies than anywhere else. The New York Times called her a pioneer for women in science because she figured out a way to connect science with house cleaning. She did much more than that. She connected the ills of the household to the ills of her community, and she urged women to get out and do something about bad food, impure water, and unsanitary sewage treatment. Our second environmental pioneer is Anna Botsford Comstock. Anna Botsford Comstock loved bugs, kids, and the great outdoors. If any of you have enjoyed a nature field trip, or if you were members of a scout troop or gone on a camp out, tip your hat to Anna Comstock. She grew up on her parents' farm in New York, where she developed an appreciation for the wonders of nature. When she married, she turned her observant eye to illustrating the insects that she and her husband studied, drawing thousands of detailed pictures, first for her husband's books, then for the books they wrote together. Once she started writing her own books, her Handbook of Nature Study became the go-to source for teachers and others who wanted to interest children in the beauties of the natural world. Comstock is also famous for designing the first nature studies program for children, which became a model for nature studies programs all around the world and has helped to foster a new appreciation of the importance of conservation in the generations that have come after her. In 1923, the League of Women Voters named Comstock as one of the 12 greatest women in America whose work made the world a better place. But environmentally friendly living doesn't just mean protecting natural spaces. It also means finding ways to create green spaces in our towns and our cities. Our third quiet hero, Kate Sessions, spent most of her childhood living in and around the towering trees of Northern California. Then, as an adult, she moved to San Diego, which was then a dry city with almost no plant life. Sessions was determined to change that city landscape. So, she leased 30 acres in the barren city park and promised to plant 100 trees every year in that barren space. It's now called Balboa Park. She also agreed to plant 300 trees every year all over San Diego. And today, her parks and gardens are found throughout that city, and Sessions is known as the mother of Balboa Park. Rosalie Barrow Edge was really a gutsy maverick. She was such a ferocious advocate for the protection of wildlife that the New Yorker magazine once called her the only honest, unselfish, indomitable hellcat in the history of conservation. After she developed an interest in bird watching in the 1920s, Edge was horrified to learn that 7,000 bald eagles were being slaughtered every year in the Alaskan Territory, and that existing conservation groups didn't care because the eagles were not considered rare at that time. So she founded the Emergency Conservation Committee, which was dedicated to protecting all species of birds and animals, rare and common alike. She also ended decades of hawk and eagle shootings on a ridge in the Appalachian Mountains by buying the property in 1934. And she turned it into the world's first refuge for birds of prey. And that refuge still exists. Alice Hamilton was an American physician and a research scientist, a leading expert in the field of occupational health, and a pioneer in the study of the dangerous effects of lead. Hamilton began her long career in public health and workplace safety in 1910. She was investigating the industrial processes that exposed workers to lead poisoning. And her work resulted in the passage of the first workers' compensation laws in the country, and ultimately led to OSHA regulations on a national level that required employers to take safety precautions to protect workers. We owe her our thanks for regulations that keep lead out of our paint, our water supplies, our water pipes, and out of gasoline. In January of 1919, Hamilton became the first woman appointed to the Harvard faculty in any field as an assistant professor at the Harvard Medical School. Her appointment was hailed by the New York Tribune with this headline, "A woman on the Harvard faculty. The last citadel has fallen. The sex has come into her own." Hamilton's comment was, "Yes, I am the first woman on the Harvard faculty, but I am not the first one that should have been appointed." During her years at Harvard, from her appointment in 1919 to her retirement in 1935, Hamilton never received a full faculty promotion and held only a series of 3-year appointments. She was excluded from all faculty social activities. She could not enter the Harvard Union. She could not attend the faculty club, and she didn't even get her quota of football tickets. In addition, she was not allowed to march in the university's commencement ceremonies with her male colleagues. Eventually, Alice Hamilton did receive the recognition that she deserved, but most of her honors came after her death in 1970. Since 1997, the American Society for Environmental History has annually awarded an Alice Hamilton Prize, and the Harvard School of Public Health now sponsors the annual Alice Hamilton Memorial Lecture and Award to recognize especially promising junior faculty. Her bust now occupies a place of honor in the atrium of the Harvard Medical School. Another woman whose conservation efforts has also left a lasting legacy was Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. When Douglas moved to Miami, the Everglades were considered to be a worthless swamp. But she saw something much different. She saw a vibrant web of ecosystems that was worthy of protection, and one that provided much of Florida's clean water. "There are no other Everglades in the world," she wrote in her 1947 book, Rivers of Grass. At the age of 79, and I think that's wonderful because it's actually older than I am, at the age of 79, she founded the Friends of the Everglades to protest a major construction project of the Corps of Engineers that was designed to protect Everglade marshland from seasonal flooding. But what really happened was it would then allow the land to be used for agriculture and public development, real estate development. So she echoed Ellen Swallow Richards to justify her involvement in protesting this project. She said, "It's a woman's business to be interested in the environment. It's an extended form of housekeeping." Without her activism, the Everglades would likely have died forever after large sections were either drained or contaminated. In 1998, Florida Governor Lawton Chiles summed up her influence by saying after her death that Marjorie was not just a pioneer of the environmental movement, she was a prophet, calling out to us to save the environment for our children and our grandchildren. Number 7 on my list of environmental crusaders is Margaret Thomas Murray. Hailed by many including the Sierra Club and the Wilderness Society, as the grandmother of the conservation movement. This naturalist, author, and adventurer loved the outdoors, and she spent nearly 40 years studying wildlife with her husband on backpacking trips into the wild country of Alaska and Wyoming. In 1956, she and her husband started a campaign to protect some of Alaska's most at-risk natural territory. With the help of Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, they convinced President Eisenhower to set aside 8 million acres as the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. 3 decades later, she worked on another conservation act to double the size of the refuge. Today, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is one of the world's largest intact ecosystems, and it's one of the few places in the United States that has never been developed or industrialized. Margaret Murray also lobbied Congress to pass the Wilderness Act, which officially defined wilderness areas and then created the National Wilderness Preservation System, which today protects over 100 million acres in the United States. For her work, Murray was honored by President Bill Clinton with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I have chosen biologist Rachel Carson as the final environmental pioneer of this talk because when she published Silent Spring in 1962, she didn't just call attention to the dangers of indiscriminate use of DDT. She also launched the modern environmental movement that we celebrate today. Carson's thesis throughout Silent Spring was that DDT and other chemicals that were used to kill pests bled into the environment and affected our water sources. Birds and animals who ate the poisoned insects or drank the contaminated water then died. Humans could be affected too through their drinking water and food products. 3 days after Silent Spring was published, the United Farm Workers Convention presented data on the human risks of pesticides. They heard firsthand accounts that described skin rashes, dizziness and nausea, respiratory ailments, and cancers that were faced by farm workers exposed to DDT. Carson's work was obviously not popular with the chemical industry. Opponents of Silent Spring attacked Rachel Carson personally. She was accused of being radical, disloyal, unscientific, and hysterical. Former Secretary of Agriculture Ezra Taft Benson wrote privately to President Eisenhower that Carson was probably a communist. A leading chemical company, Velsicol Chemical, wrote the book's publisher that if the public demanded elimination of pesticides as a result of that book, our supply of food would be reduced to Iron Curtain parity. William Darby of the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine linked Carson to the organic gardeners, the anti-fluoride leaguers, the worshipers of natural foods, and the pseudoscientists. Allegations that Carson was just a hysterical woman appeared both in the pages of the chemical and agricultural journals as well as in the popular press. Opinions had changed very little since 1896. Women were still imagined to be less rational, more emotional, and more sentimental than men. Men who could be relied upon to study issues dispassionately and to propose rational solutions. An agricultural expert told a reporter covering the congressional committee hearings on DDT exposure, he said that you're never going to satisfy those hysterical women in garden clubs. Since Carson was not on a university faculty, she was dismissed as an amateur who did not understand the subject the way a professional scientist would. Reviews of her book in Time, U.S. News and World Report, and even Sports Illustrated took her to task. The reviewer in Time, for example, criticized her emotion-fanning words and characterized her argument as unfair, one-sided, and hysterically, there's that word again, over-emphatic. But Silent Spring ultimately did gain support, and today it is considered a landmark literary event of the 20th century. Carson's book paved the way for new laws and new communities and new agencies, and most importantly, it prompted the modern environmental movement. It triggered the explosion that has culminated in our current wave of environmental activism. With the publication of Silent Spring, the floodgates opened for women in the environmental movement. I want to mention just a few of the women who are still active environmentalists, showing the way for our daughters and our granddaughters. Sylvia Earl was a groundbreaking marine biologist and oceanographer. She was Time magazine's Hero of the Planet in 1998. She's best known for Mission Blue, which is a nonprofit dedicated to creating marine preserves all around the world and to increasing public awareness of the ecological importance of the ocean, which she calls the blue heart of the planet. Early in her life, Winona LaDuke learned about the challenges facing Native Americans. But within her culture's traditional connection to the land, she also saw a new potential for a model of sustainable development and locally based, environmentally conscious production from everything from food to energy. The sustainable development initiatives that her foundation promotes include renewable energy resources, indigenous farming, local food systems, and improved sanitation measures. If you ever want to go to a restaurant and they talk about farm-to-table food and everything, think about Winona Duke. She started it. Lois Gibbs. Her involvement in environmental causes began in 1978 when she discovered that her son's elementary school and her neighborhood of Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York, was built on a toxic waste dump. Gibbs organized her neighbors and led her community in a battle against the local, state, and federal governments. Her efforts were successful and eventually led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Comprehensive Environmental Response, and it's better known as the Superfund. It's used now to locate and clean up toxic waste sites throughout the United States. And many of you may know that there's one here in Dallas. It's not too far south of here, just on the east side of I-35, where they are cleaning up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of piles of toxic tires that have been stored there. Well, here's another one you might recognize. This is Erin Brockovich. Erin Brockovich was working as a law clerk with no formal education in law when she became instrumental in building a major case against the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, better known as PG&E, for their contamination of the groundwater in Hinckley, California. After PG&E dumped hundreds of millions of gallons of chromium-6 tainted wastewater into unlined ponds near the town, the residents started reporting strange illnesses. In 1993, Brockovich started investigating those illnesses, and her careful work resulted in a $333 million settlement. You probably know her story. I know her story because of the award-winning film starring Julia Roberts about that Hinckley case. Dr. Diane Glave is a historian. I'm fortunate enough to know her. A historian and a professor whose specialty is African American environmentalism. She works within her community to help poor and marginalized people lobby their towns and cities for more access to parks and recreation. Marie Gonneau fights against environmentally devastating mountaintop removal in Appalachia, an area that holds some of the most important forest ecosystems in North America. In 2009, Gonneau received the Goldman Environmental Prize for opposing this controversial practice that destroys the land and fills the valleys and streams with toxic waste. The coal industry claims that stopping mountaintop removal would end jobs, she wrote. Well, the people of West Virginia need jobs. But the people who think their jobs are more important than our water haven't had to live without water, she concluded. Marjorie Richard grew up in a historically black neighborhood of Norco, Louisiana, painfully aware of the devastating health conditions that her community faced as a result of the Shell refinery next door. According to Richard, the defining moment that convinced her to become an activist occurred in 1973 when a Shell pipeline exploded, knocking one house off its foundation and killing its elderly woman who lived there. It also killed the teenage boy who was mowing her lawn. Eventually, Richard won a long, hard-fought battle to hold Shell accountable. And in the process, she became a master of political theater. She installed a web camera in her trailer home to broadcast video of the refinery spewing petrochemical byproducts into the air. Then, while speaking at an international environmental conference, she approached Shell officials and invited them to take a sniff of air, of narco air from the bag that she held. Dolores Huerta worked with Cesar Chavez to found the United Farm Workers. We hear about him, we don't hear about her very much. This is an organization that promotes healthy work environments for farm workers, and she is still around and currently is focusing her work on promoting the health of workers and families in California's Central Valley. This is Rue Mapp. Rue Mapp grew up in an outdoor-loving family. As an adult, she was surprised to discover that she was the only black woman involved in her outdoor hiking and bike groups. And she was determined to get more of her community involved in the outdoors. So she founded Outdoor Afro. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to connecting Black Americans with the natural world. Mapp's goal is to shift the visual representation about what it looks like for people to be out in nature. And she wants to provide leadership training for people of color. Her work has successfully connected underrepresented communities to nature and to explore the benefits of spending more time in the outdoors. And as a result of her work, she has been named a National Geographic Fellow. Dana Meadows was a pioneering American environmental scientist, teacher, and writer. She's best known as the lead author of the influential book, The Limits of Growth, which began a debate about the limits of the Earth's capacity to support human economic expansion. And that's a debate that continues today. Speak the truth. Speak it loud and often, she said. Speak it calmly, but insistently, and speak it to power. Material accumulation, she concluded, is not the purpose of human existence. All growth is not good. Protecting our environment is a necessity, not a luxury. There is such a thing as enough. And I learned about Dana Richardson when I went to Yosemite. She died in 2001 of a brain tumor, and Yosemite National Park named these meadows and that mountain in the background. That's Mount Dana there. And my husband and I actually climbed Mount Dana. Believe me, we were a lot younger then. I want to end this presentation by remembering one of Texas's own, an environmentalist whose passion for beautification is apparent along Texas highways every spring. And obviously, I'm talking about Lady Bird Johnson here. Johnson was well known for her dedication to environmental protection and preservation. She lobbied for the Highways Beautification Acts so that she could seek to push billboards away from the highways, and she insisted that junkyards be screened from the views of the passing motorists there. Other beautification projects that she supported included planting thousands of daffodils and tulips around Washington, D.C. She created a hike and bike trail along the Colorado River just outside of Austin and planted hundreds of flowering trees along Austin's Town Lake, which is now named after her. But most importantly, she urged the Texas Highway Department to seed wildflowers along Texas roads and to adjust their mowing schedules so that the wildflowers could reseed naturally. This year, because of our late freeze at the end of February, the bluebonnet season's going to be a little bit late. But I encourage all of you, take a weekend day in April and explore one of DFW's wildflower trails. This is my favorite one. This is the Wildflower Trail in Ennis. Ennis is an hour south of here, and it really, really does look just like this. Absolutely beautiful. Well, thank you all again for coming today and for your attention. I hope that the stories of these determined women have inspired you. We can't all be scientists or political activists, but we can be environmentalists in our own lives. We can conserve water, we can recycle waste, and we can enjoy the beauty of our planet. Thank you all very much.